Welcome back to the Socially Delightful Podcast, everybody. Today I have Sheena Yap Chan on the podcast. We are going to be talking about her upcoming book, Bridging the Confidence Gap. I'm so excited about it. Sheena, I know I've already told you this, but everybody listening to this podcast is probably going to run out and buy your book because that's what this podcast is all about. But for those of you that are maybe meeting Sheena for the first time, she is a Wall Street Journal best-selling author, keynote speaker, strategist, and award-winning podcaster for her podcast, The Tao of Self-Confidence. I actually checked today because I was curious. Sheena, you have over 900 interviews on The Tao
Yes.
of Self-Confidence. That's amazing. That's amazing. So, with over 1 million downloads, her podcast rates as one of the top 0.5% most popular shows globally. Sheena has been featured in so many places, y'all. Like, she's given speeches for Live Nation, NASA. She's been on Mind Valley, Fox, NBC News. I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you for being here, Sheena.
Thank you so much for having me, Jewel. It's such an honor to be here today.
I'm so excited. So, for everybody listening, I want to hear about how this journey started for you, how it started to start exploring self confidence, and especially for women and Asian women as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think it really started from my upbringing. Growing up in Toronto in the mid 90s or in the early 90s, there was no one in the media that looked like me. So I always felt ashamed of who I was. I always felt like I couldn't go out there and do something outside of what I'm told to do. And so I also was ashamed of my own culture because I wanted to look a certain way. And it wasn't until my 20s when I dyed my hair back from blonde to my original hair color was when I embraced my culture. And in 2015, when I was dealing with my own confidence issues, there was no resources that really catered, especially to Asian women. And so part of me thought something was wrong with me because I had all these confidence issues, not feeling good enough, always people pleasing. And I thought I was the only one doing that. And also for me, representation was so important. So I decided to start my own platform, which is the podcast, The Tao of Self Confidence, where I've interviewed over 800 women on this topic of confidence. And as much as I love podcasting, and I know you understand this too, Jewel, it's a labor of love. It's also still a very small platform compared to other media platforms. So I knew I needed to increase the visibility through different media platforms. And that's when books came in February of 2021. I co created a book called Asian Women Who Boss Up, which highlights the stories of 18 Asian women who are able to forge their own path, overcome obstacles, and thrive. And also, it led me to writing my first book with Wiley called The Tao of Self Confidence, a guide to moving beyond trauma and awakening the leader within. Because I would get a lot of people asking me, how do you build confidence? What are ways to boost confidence? And for me, it was like, I can tell you 101 different ways, but if you don't work through your traumas, it's not going to help. So we all go through trauma. Sometimes we're not aware of the trauma that's really stopping us. Um, Sometimes we're carrying the traumas of our parents and grandparents. And so instead of building confidence, we have to get to the root cause as to why we're dealing with low self-confidence, low self-esteem. Work through that so we can build confidence the right way. And yes, later this year, I have my new book, Bridging the Confidence Gap: How Empowered Women Change the World, which is available for pre-order now. And this is a leadership book for all women, right? They this stemmed out of the World Economic Forum mentioning that gender parity will be achieved at the earliest in 2154. Yeah. So
Whoa.
now they've actually delayed it. So at the time I wrote the book, it was 2154, but there's a new report saying that the earliest would be 2158. And at the rate we're going, I feel like it's going to get longer. So it's going to take over 130 years, which we won't see. It's going to take 5 generations to see this happening. And so, what do we need to do to start building confidence? So, this book is a guide to that, talking about the pitfalls, the reasons why we deal with low self confidence, and then how we can start building that confidence, right? What can we do
Yeah.
as women as well to do that? And how we can have more women in leadership. So that's a little bit about me and how
Yeah.
it started.
Yeah, so beautiful. So for anybody listening that, you know, maybe a little bit more unaware, why do you think it's important to talk about it for Asian women specifically, like confidence for Asian women? Because I know that your first book, right, and your podcast has really focused on highlighting like Asian women's self-confidence, which I think that alone is so important. So I'm just curious, could you tell us a little bit about why it's important to also, I mean, bring up everybody, every woman, but to really highlight confidence for Asian women?
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, for me, it was really important because I never saw any platforms that highlighted Asian women's achievements, their stories. I mean, being able to interview so many Asian women on the podcast, learning that they can be more than just a doctor and a lawyer. That nothing's wrong with that, but building nine-figure businesses or having 2 million followers on YouTube. It's great to see that there's so many different ways to do that, and then culturally, we're not told to go out there and forge our own path. We're told to go to school, get a job, get married, have babies, run the household, and never rock the boat. We're always told to just be in our shell and never step out. And because of that, we deal with so much issues, right? And then historically, or in Asian culture, men have always been favored over women. So, back in the day, if somebody had a son and a daughter and they had to choose who would go to school, the son would be preferred to go to school. So there's just a lot of things that we've gone through that built up, that's been passed on, that led to all this. And it was important for me to show, especially Asian women, that you can go beyond that, right? You can come out of your shell and show up as your beautiful self. And I've seen that through the many stories through the many women that I've interviewed. So it was really important for me to highlight that. And especially as someone who wants representation or craves for it, then I had to start with myself.
Yeah. Yeah. So beautiful. So beautiful. So, as you were writing this book, the Bridging the Confidence Gap, your latest book, which, wow. And like, I can only imagine that like writing a book is in a way like creating like just like this masterful art, this like bringing this baby into the world, and now you have three of them. But as you were writing this book, I'm curious, did anything surprise you or stick out to you about confidence?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons why I wrote this book was because of the confidence gap, right? I remember seeing this for the first time maybe about 5 years ago, and I was like, oh, this is interesting, right? What is the confidence gap? I've never heard of that. And, generally they say the confidence gap, men are generally more confident than women, right? Uh, when if a man or a woman went to apply for an interview, the man would be about 30% ready and he would just go for it. While as a woman, you would be 110% ready and you would still hold back, right? There's still something that holds you back, and it's how you perceive yourself, right? You think you're not good enough, there's someone better out there. And sometimes we over prepare to the point that we're too afraid to go for it. Meanwhile, if a man went for it, even if he gets rejected, he's okay because at least he
Yeah.
went for it. And so I started reading more about this. There's been studies about this. And, it's important to bridge this gap, right? Because it's if you look at the world currently, right, there's still more men in leadership. Nothing wrong with that. We do need more women in leadership. There's been statistics that say when there are more women in leadership, it's not only that women who benefits, the whole world benefits, right? If we have more women in the workforce, the country has more money to um, go out there and make things better for the people. So it's really important for me to talk about this because there's so many amazing women out there that I see that are incredible, yet how they see themselves really stops them from moving forward. And I know one of the reasons, or one of the main things we go through, is imposter syndrome, right? We feel like we're not good enough, we're a fraud, there's someone better out there. In fact, there was a report that in the corporate space, 75% of women executives go through imposter syndrome. So I also do a deep dive on that in the book. because I think that's really important. One of the things we do as women, not all women, but most women, is self sabotage, right? We tend to sabotage our own self, thinking, oh, we're not good enough, someone else is better. I can't do this, even though we're more than qualified to do it. And I've been guilty of it as well. I'm not saying I've never done this. I've done this. That's why I understand that these things I've been through, I get it. And I can talk about this based on my own experiences, based on the studies that's been shared in on the internet. Um, and so, yeah, just putting it all together in a book, which I never thought I would ever have done. I would have ever done. So,
Yeah.
I when I migrated to Toronto from the Philippines, I started to take English classes because I couldn't speak English properly. So, I sharing this means just because you weren't able to speak English properly, entering into a country that you've never been to doesn't mean it stops you from becoming a writer. So never let your past or your limitations stop you from moving forward.
Yeah, I love that. And thank you for sharing that story. I think that's really powerful. And what you said about imposter syndrome, some experts out there, well, I actually can't find one that disagrees. But anyway, some experts out there talk a lot about how imposter syndrome is a form of social anxiety. And we know as well that women report, especially, well, I should say, American women have are more likely to have social anxiety compared to men, and that's even worse when we take that on a global scale. That gap, if you will, of social anxiety and not the confidence gap, if you will, is even worse on a global scale. So, when you talk about empowering women, because I know one of your main speeches that you have given to all of these companies, right, is how can we empower like women's leadership? So, for women that are listening to this and they're hearing this and they're like, okay, how can I get started? What would you recommend that they can start to do to empower themselves in leadership?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the most important is reminding women that they don't have to do this alone. As women, we've been taught to be the superwoman and everything, and that's exhausting, right? I think part of the reason why we go through so much social anxiety is because we have to do everything, like everything, right? Like not only work a job, have a business, but take care of kids, family members, run errands. I mean, we do it all, right? And we're supposed to do it all and not complain and, show up as this perfect person. And it's just unattainable. So, uh, that's one of the first things I would do is seek support. Reach out to people who've been there before and can show you the way. And
Mm.
there's so many resources out there, whether it's podcasts, books, YouTube videos, women's groups. They can go and check and see what works for them, what helps them. And I think the most important is just starting. Not worrying about making mistakes, because we're gonna do it. We're gonna end up making mistakes. It's not. I mean, that's bound to happen. It's learning from our mistakes is really important, because men go out there and just make mistakes as they go and just figure things out. And if women did the same thing, just imagine what we can achieve. So
Mhm.
starting is actually the hardest part of everything. I get it. I've been there. There were times where I would delay myself, where I'd second guess myself, where I was too afraid to start. And then when I started, I was like, what was I waiting for? Right. So starting is really the most important, and seeking support. Just seeking support, knowing that you don't have to do this alone, because it's a lot easier when you have that support system, because you're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days, and that support will help you along the way, especially when you have bad days, right? If you're part of a women's group, they're there to cheer you up. They understand what you've already been through, so they can advise you on like what you can do.
Yeah. If anybody is just listening to this podcast and not watching it, I am just like a little bobblehead over here. I I knew you were going to be the best fit for this podcast because we talk so much about how we don't have to do it alone and about how connection is fueling. And I love what you said about allowing ourselves to make mistakes because I think a big barrier to women's confidence, to them overcoming social anxiety, is the perfectionism of trying to show up perfectly and not make any mistakes and being overly responsible for how like all of the things in their lives go. So I just really appreciate you highlighting that.
Thank you,
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah. So how do you think that we can create teams and systems? Like, so we want to do this ourselves, we want to go and seek support, we want to embrace that we're going to make mistakes. How do you think as like a collective, as in like teams and companies, how can we also empower women's leadership there?
Yeah, I mean, I share some of those strategies in the book, but I think, yeah, working together as a team is really important. Men and women being on board together, having that unified vision is really important. Sometimes, unfortunately, as women, we also tend to bring each other down, especially in the corporate space, right? There's this lack mentality that there's only one spot at the top, and that if the other woman gets it, it's like there goes your spot. But really, there's more than enough spots at the top, right? And we need more women at the top. So that's, I think, something that's probably not talked about as much, because I've spoken to a lot of women who told me actually it was the men who were more supportive than the women. So I've been there too, right? Like working in an office, dealing with catty women. It wasn't pretty, but I guess we had to go through it for a reason, to share about these things, to talk about this is also a problem, right? This is also a problem that's not talked about. And so I think we need to go in with an abundance mindset, knowing that there's more than enough spots at the top. Finding mentorship, having men and women on board. That's why the book is bridging the confidence gap, because it's not just women who will bridge this gap; men will also bridge it. And having programs that can mentor women and help them utilize what they've learned into the real world. Having mentorship is great, but if these women aren't utilizing it in the real world, then the mentorship is useless, because these women aren't taking action and getting the results that they want. So um like there's some studies and instances that I wrote in the book that kind of helps women be empowered to have be in leadership, working together to to get that goal as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell us a bit about why, even if it's, I'm just curious from your perspective, why do you think it is that there tends to be a bit of like relational aggression between women in the workplace because they're thinking, okay, there's one spot at the top, which I think that alone describes a lot of it, right? If you think there's one spot and it feels scarce to you, of course you're going to feel like you have to compete, right? But I guess I'm just curious, like, what else do you think fuels that?
I think it's just how women have been seen in society for so long, right? Of course, we need to change that narrative, change that perspective. That's the first thing. And, to unlearn that will take some time, because for so many years we've been taught women were not, were meant to be at home, run the household, take care of the kids. They would never, encourage women to go to work, be in the workforce, encourage them to be in a leadership position. So, as a whole, society needs to encourage women to see that we can be in leadership roles, and we can have more than one woman, right? One woman does not represent how many billion women in the world.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important to share, knowing that, like, I think it's just been ingrained in our head for so long that we just
Mm.
think there's only one spot at the top when there's more than enough.
Yeah. I feel like, too, it actually hurts us in the long run as well, because if we're competing with each other for these roles, and it doesn't even matter if it's corporate, right? I see this even sometimes in spaces like when I'm networking. Sometimes I think it hurts our progress in the long run as well, because if we're not pulling other women up with us, then there is just going to keep being like, we're increasing the likelihood of there just keep being like one spot up there for women to step into, right? Rather than, okay, I'm here, let me pull somebody else up and we can do it together. It reminds me of, and think I have the last name right, but I don't know exactly. But if I believe correctly, and if I'm wrong, forgive me, Anna Friedman describes this like theory of calling it like the shine theory. And it's where she says, okay, if I shine, you shine brighter. If you shine, I shine brighter. And it just reminds me of that, okay, we're going to pull each other up. We're going to encourage each other so that way we can really make progress. So the shine theory, and she gives like really great examples of it, but like Beyonce shining really bright doesn't impact like the other women in Destiny Child, uh, the group. If I'm probably dating myself a little bit here, but that doesn't impact like the rest of like the Destiny Child's group. That just adds to more shine to them for Beyonce, quote unquote, shining even brighter, right? Yeah,
I love that analogy, and it's important, right? As we shine, we bring other women to shine with us.
yeah, yeah. I love it too, right? It's so genius, and I think that visual is really helpful. So we talked a bit about encouraging women too and saying, hey, you can step into these leadership roles. When you are working with companies, Sheena, and you are giving these talks to them, how would you advise? Like, let's say somebody listening to this right now is a manager and they want to know how they can begin, which we've given so much, but they want to know when they leave this podcast, okay, here's how I can empower the women that are a part of my team. What would you want them to know?
I think I'd want them to know, first off, women are more than capable to go out there and do it. Sometimes they just need to know um, that they are capable, right? As I mentioned, how we perceive ourselves is can make or break us, right? And sometimes I've been guilty of this too. I just feel like sometimes I'm not good enough. There's someone better out there, but yet, you have so many skills and talents that can really make a difference for the better. And so, helping these amazing women tap into that magic that makes them who they are and really and shine, right? And then I think having a safe space to just talk about what they've been through, what they're going through, what they need help with, I think is really important, right? Sometimes in the workplace, we feel like we just need to be in like corporate mode, but sometimes we also just need a time or a group or a space where we can just have these open conversations so that we can find the solutions to them. Because of course, companies, they want to make money, right? Nothing wrong with that. But if you don't have if you don't empower your own people, regardless if they're men or women, your production goes down, which in turn your revenue goes down, your profit margin goes down. So having instilling confidence, instilling professional personal development is really important in the workplace because that's what will help them take action and go out there and get the results that you want, right? They say it's like the 80-20 rule, right? 80% mindset, 20% action. So you need to figure out ways to encourage them, to help them see their potential, and then, you know, push them a little bit, right? To take action in what they're meant to do.
Yeah, I love that. So if I were to synthesize, like having a safe space for them to talk about things that they have gone through, like we talked about earlier, like, hey, it's okay to make mistakes, right? Being a little bit more of a safe space. And then it sounds like as well, like focusing on their strengths and like what makes them then and like a strengths based perspective. And then it sounds like as well, you talked about like challenging them, encouraging them, like to take risks, having them build up their skills. Is that fair?
Yes, yes.
I love that. Awesome. 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 Okay. And I know you also talk about authenticity quite a bit, which I absolutely love. So I would be completely remiss if I didn't steal a few more minutes of your time and ask you about authenticity. For you, Sheena, how do you think authenticity and confidence work together?
Yeah, I mean, I think they go hand in hand. Like showing up as your real self is really important because, we're not always going to be 100% confident. Having the confidence to show up as yourself, your authentic self is also important, right? Being able to be vulnerable, being able to share the good, bad, and the ugly. because when you can show up more as yourself, like you just feel a lot better in knowing that you don't always have to hide behind a mask or behind a filter. I mean, we live in a world where social media can paint such a picture where it messes with us mentally, right? Um, I just read a couple of things about the short TikTok ban in the US, and all these influencers decided to come out and say what they were doing wasn't authentic, right? And when you do things like that, it just breaks down the trust, right? It's like your audience doesn't trust you anymore because you've done something that's totally out of alignment, that's not who you are. And it's unfortunate that it's happened, right? Hopefully it's a learning lesson for these people. um, but I think it's important to say, hey, I made a mistake. Hey, I'm not feeling good today. And I'm not saying you do it overly, right? There's like, it's always, of course, a balance. And I think as long as it helps one person out there see it, they can sense the authenticity, right? Like, of course, there's people out there who create skits to paint this picture, but people will see through that, right? They'll see through it. But if you genuinely do this out of your heart, like with good intentions, then I think it should be, you should go out there and do it. I mean, there's days where I would share like on social media, like, hey, I just got rejected by like 10 events, right? And yes, it's a little depressing, and I probably want to eat my feelings right now, but I'm going to get myself back up and keep moving forward because life is part of life. We can't do anything, we can't control it. We can't control how we feel and how we move forward.
Yeah. I love that. And thank you for sharing that. Because it's one thing to be in it and again to feel alone of like, oh, I keep getting rejected. It's always helpful to hear like, no, all of us uh get rejected and we can just like you said, like keep moving forward. We can become more rejection resilient. And I loved what you said about authenticity as well. And I think that example of the influencers and yes, our very short TikTok ban that we had over here in the States is a great example as well, too, because when we often are hiding things or we're putting on a front, that builds shame. And shame is not going to be helpful for our social anxiety, our perfectionism, or our confidence, right? So I think that's a good thing for everybody to kind of take with them is like, what is something that, maybe you want to be a bit more honest about, maybe take some ownership around. Is it some mistakes like we talked about earlier in this episode? Because truthfully, like I use the word ownership, but taking some ownership around it has proven again and again to help our self-esteem and then therefore like our self-confidence and so on. And it's also very connective because like Sheena just did, honestly, with that example of, because I know what it's like to be pitching yourself and to hear all those rejections. Absolutely, do I know what that's like. And even just you sharing that, I get to now have the most connective thought ever, which is, oh my gosh, me too. Same, right? And so by talking about these things, these are quote unquote like failures or moments of rejection, we're actually helping each other feel less alone as well. Sheena, I could probably ask you 1,000 more questions about this, about your book. I'm so excited for your book. Is there anything we haven't touched on yet that you want to make sure that we do?
No, I think we've covered everything. So yeah, I'm
Yay!
really excited. Again, thank you for having me as a guest. And yeah, the book Bridging the Confidence Gap is available for pre-order at any major book retailers across the US, Canada, and globally. So I'm super excited about that.
Yes, yes, it's at SheenaYapChan.com/building the confidence gap. We are going to have that link down below for y'all's convenience as well. Um, Sheena also is a great speaker. You can check out her other book as well if you're like waiting for this book to come out, The Tao of Self Confidence. So we'll have all that down below for y'all. Which, by the way, do you have a date for when this book will be given to the world?
Yeah, I think it'll be released in May of this year of 2025, so I'm super excited about that. Also a little nervous because like, it's my second book and for me, it's like, oh, I gotta make sure it's as good as the first one. But I think I'm just really grateful that I've been able to write two books for a major publisher like Wiley. So I'm really just grateful for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's already a success. And thank you so much for sharing your heart, your insight. Thank you so much for being here on the Socially Delightful podcast. And I will see the rest of y'all next time.